Welcome all members and officers to this meeting of Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee 2, which due to government advice is being held remotely, with committee members and officers accessing the meeting from different locations. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed subsequently. Please can everyone ensure all mobile phones are switched off or in silent. Members would have received an electronic copy of the agenda pack on Tuesday, the 8th of December, and for the record, this agenda can be viewed on the Council website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their cameras on at that point. But I would ask that, with the exception of myself as chairperson, at all other times you keep cameras and microphones switched off, as this will minimise background noise and interference, and also it will ensure the connection remains as stable as possible. So please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Officers from Scrutiny will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout the meeting, and where necessary will mute those not being used. If any member or officer wishes to speak, to raise a point or question, please use the instant messaging icon, IN, on the bottom left of the Skype window and type speak. I will come to you in the order that I receive these requests. Please do not use the IM instant messaging to chat, enter questions or comments. Right, I will now ask the Scrutiny Officer to announce the name of the councillors in attendance at this meeting. Thank you.
Okay, Chair, we have Councillor Mike Clark, Councillor Pam Davis, Councillor Sorrel Dendy, Councillor Jane Gebby, yourself, Councillor Cheryl Green, Councillor Altaf Hussain, Councillor Martin Jones, Councillor Mike Kern, Councillor Anel Pacella, Councillor Gary Thomas, Councillor Caroline Webster, Councillor David White, and that's it, Chair, at the moment. Chair, you are on mute.
Sorry, right. I only have Councillor Aspey, Councillor Janice Lewis and Councillor White and Councillor Tim Thomas not present at the moment.
That's
right. Okay, can we move to apologies now then, please? I know you have one, Tracy.
Yeah, okay, so Councillor Tim Thomas has sent his apologies. He will try and make the end of the meeting. And I also have apologies from Pete Tyson, Group Manager Commissioning Contracts, and Jackie Davis, Head of Adult Social Care.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much for that. Right, are there any members that have any declarations of interest at this point, please? Councillor Gebby has indicated that she still has no sound, so hopefully Mark will contact her shortly. Okay, I'll take the lack of IM as being no declarations of interest at this moment in time. Could I move to the minutes, please, and could I have a mover and a seconder for these minutes as being a true record of the meeting?
Second.
All agreed? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very, very much. Right, we're now going to move to item 4 on the agenda, and it's a verbal update from the Corporate Director. And can I say thank you, all officers, for your attendance here today. I do realise that you are under extreme pressure at the moment and really welcome this opportunity to be updated. So do I go over to Claire Marchant now then, please?
Thank you very much, Chair, and hopefully everybody can hear me. And for the purpose of the recording,
yes.
I'm Claire Marchant, Corporate Director of Social Services and Wellbeing, and this is my first Scrutiny Committee here in Bridgend, so it's very, very nice to be here. We have got a presentation which myself and Laura Kinsey and Andrew Thomas are going to run through with members this morning, if that's okay. I think, Tracy, that Scrutiny officers were going to display it for us, if that's all right.
Yeah, Andrew Rees, our Democratic Services Manager, is going to display it for you, Claire, this morning.
That's right, Claire. I've got the presentation here, so I'll attempt to present my screen now, and then your presentation should come up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
I think whilst Andrew's just doing that, I can start to just give a little bit of the context if we move on to the next slide. So what we're going to talk about is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on social services and wellbeing here in Bridgend. And I think part of what we're going to talk about this morning is both the initial response to the pandemic, but very much the current context as well. And as Councillor Green has already said this morning, we're very much still in pandemic response mode, as well as planning for our ongoing recovery and renewal. And whilst we're doing all of that, we're also continuing to run as best we can, business as usual, and continuing to improve what we do. So between myself and Laura and Andrew will take you through the slides. Just to say that Jackie would have really liked to have been here this morning, but in terms of that impact of the pandemic, is particularly acute on adult social care services. So we've had to prioritise Jackie's time into continuing to lead that response in adult social care services, and it is very live, as members will know, this week and in the lead up to Christmas. If we move on to the next slide, we'll just talk a little bit about that initial response to the pandemic. And obviously, when we were in various meetings at this time last year and even at the beginning of 2020, we didn't know what was coming. We hadn't heard of COVID-19, but by February and certainly into the beginning of March, we were moving into that active pandemic response, and that was very much part of emergency planning arrangements. So it was a partnership response, and we'll talk a little bit about more about that in a moment. And our emergency planning arrangements in social services were very much in accordance with those arrangements we put in place as a council at a gold level with our local resilience forum partners across South East Wales, in partnership with the Health Board and in partnership with other public sector partners as well. So if I just hand to Laura, she'll talk a little bit about children's services and how we responded back in March.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Hi, yeah, so in terms of in children's services, firstly, I'd like to add really to what Claire was saying about the sort of gold, silver, bronze structures. We also set up those structures in terms of safeguarding as well. So right from the outset, under the auspices of the local safeguarding, the regional safeguarding board, we also set up those structures, and we had regular weekly silver meetings across the region to make sure that we were discharging our safeguarding responsibilities and keeping adults and children safe. And we also had weekly operational bronze safeguarding meetings as well with partners as well to just identify if there were any issues that were impacting on our sort of, ability to discharge our responsibilities, and going to overcome those and find solutions to those scenarios. And that continued for several months. We're not running those meetings at the moment, but we will resume those structures if and when we need to. So just in terms of children's services, what we did really at the outset was we developed a delivery plan, and within that delivery plan we described how we were going to continue running the service. And I think the first thing I'd want to say really is that we didn't stop doing anything. We carried on running all of our services in children's social care, but we obviously had to do them differently. So in terms of our front door, we are information advice and assistance service, which is based in the MASH in Ravenscourt. That has continued to operate from Ravenscourt, but with a smaller team based here every day. We also set up a central team, because what happened straight away was our social workers in all of our case management teams were working from home. But what we did have was a central team then of 6 practitioners and managers based in Ravenscourt, and that team were responding to inquiries from professionals or from members of the public relating to open cases. So they were the first response team really on open cases, and they were screening those out then to social workers and managers based at home, and then the response that was required was then sort of coordinated in that way. We carried on doing all all of our visits, running core group meetings, case conferences, etc. And we did most of those remotely at the beginning of the pandemic. We were facilitating virtual contacts, so most contacts between looked after children and their families was happening virtually in the beginning, and similarly we carried on undertaking assessments for court proceedings of prospective foster carers, etc., but doing the majority of those remotely. We also had to put in place infrastructure so that we would continue to attend court as well and participate in court hearings, and we worked closely with our legal teams obviously, and most of those court hearings continue to run remotely at the moment. We have now resumed direct visits to children and families, and also contacts have now resumed as well. We've identified 3 venues across the authority and worked closely with health and safety colleagues, etc., and taken the necessary risk assessments so that contacts can take place safely between children and their families. And I think just to say as well, in terms of that service delivery plan, we've had to adhere closely, obviously, to the Welsh Government guidance that's come out as well. There's been quite prescriptive Welsh Government guidance about case management in children's social care that we've had to follow, and we've cross-referenced that every time it's been reviewed and reviewed our own plan accordingly as well. I think the last thing I wanted to say really within children's social care that was really important over the summer months as well, there was that we also ran our play scheme, if you like, for children from vulnerable groups over the summer as well. So we ran a 4-week hub play scheme in Bridgend as well for those vulnerable children, so that they continue to have support outside of the home environment, and the feedback about that was also very positive as well. So I don't know, Claire, do you want me to talk about adult services or?
I'll come back in now, Laura, if that's all right. I just tried to restart my video then. So in adult services, similar to what Laura's just talked about there in children's services, that when we moved into the pandemic, we had to review operating models. Directly provided services continue to operate. So obviously residential care, supported living, which we provide directly ourselves as a council, and obviously working in partnership as well with commissioned providers. Care at home has been critical, so domiciliary care services have been absolutely vital in keeping people well and safe and connected during the pandemic. And again, that's both directly provided domiciliary care services and services that we commission from the independent sector. Some of our services we did have to adjust and change operating models. So the key one that people will be aware of is around day opportunities and day services. In that initially in the pandemic, some of those services stopped. And then what we did as we brought those services back on stream, we risk assessed, put in place obviously very high levels of infection prevention, protection and control, personal protective equipment for individuals and for people providing those services, all the social distancing measures in place, but then looked at who came on what days into those services, so that we were providing for those who were most at risk of their home situations breaking down, and then looking at how we support in other ways and through outreach into people and into their homes for those who didn't come back into service. And that continues to be the case today, as it does around respite provision as well for people with disabilities. We have continued to operate adult safeguard, and I think it's a really important message throughout the pandemic that safeguarding front doors for both adults and children's services have always remained open and always will. And we work in multi-agency partnerships around safeguarding adults as well as safeguarding children. Some of the trickiest areas for us in adult services have been around areas such as best interest assessments, because clearly to protect care homes particularly, we have limited the number of individuals going into care homes, which means we've moved to remote models, and that has caused challenges and is something that we continue to review. Mental Health Act assessments have continued. You know, our approved mental health practitioners, social workers, alongside colleagues in the police and health, have continued to provide face-to-face Mental Health Act assessments. In terms of social work and case management, similarly to children's services, adult services moved to a home working model and adjusted the way that we worked. A lot of contact with individuals has been put in place over the telephone, and really through the height of the pandemic, keeping in touch with people, with families and carers over the telephone, proactively once a week unless people have told us not to, and I think that's provided quite a lot of connection for individuals who have welcomed largely welcomed those proactive telephone calls. We obviously in social services in Bridgend operate as part of integrated teams with the health board, and I think it's important to note that our group managers, who are integrated group managers in older person services, have also coordinated that response from district nursing, from OTs within those integrated teams, and have continued to operate that multidisciplinary team model around all our various Mrs Joneses, and to look at what the issues are in that multidisciplinary way, and to safeguard and protect, and through all the challenges, keep people as connected as we possibly can during this period. In terms of wellbeing services, which is a really critical part of the Directorate, Andrew will come in on a subsequent slide and talk in a little bit more detail about what we've done with Halo and Arwen throughout this period. I'm just noticing a typo on that slide, so I'll skip over that one. But just really, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a moment, want to emphasise the critical relationship in Bridgend with the third sector. One of the challenges very early on in the pandemic were people who were advised to shield from the virus and to really remain within their own homes throughout that period. And our contact services in the council, our business support within social services, but critically the third sector provided a very proactive response to those individuals, over 6,000 of them initially, who were advised to shield, and very, very practical support, including the distribution of food parcels. And that's been a real strength, I think, in terms of the partnership response here in Bridgend. If I can just move on to the next slide, if that's all right, I'll just talk a little bit about the workforce, because critical in this pandemic response has been that balance around keeping our own workforce safe and the workforce across the whole social care sector, and making sure that we're continuing to provide all of our statutory services to individuals with care and support needs and safeguarding needs. So we are very much again part of that corporate response. So the council has proactively supported people's well-being. Our Care First provider has provided a lot of assistance to colleagues right across the whole council in terms of our own well-being, and supporting us through all the various challenges, be it of Teams meetings and balancing work and life and working from home. In addition, there's been additional counselling support to social care staff. You know, what our workforce, and when I say our workforce, I mean the whole sector workforce, not just those directly employed by the council, have had to I suppose deal with through the pandemic, has been unprecedented in their careers. You know, it's been very harrowing and difficult to manage at times, that whole balance of risk, and providing and continuing to provide support to individuals, and to cope with the really difficult situations that people have found themselves in. Lots of our usual responses in terms of community support and connection have been different, and it's been really, really important that we've been able to support our staff as they've moved through their own response and reflections on what they're having to deal with day in, day out, and still very clearly having to deal with. We have supported home working. I think that the council moving to a home working model within the timescales that we did was phenomenal. But obviously coming with that comes all the risk assessments around, the IT equipment, the chairs, etc., and keeping people safe. It seems a long while ago now, but the provision of PPE at the start of the pandemic was obviously a real challenge across Wales, across the UK, and within Bridgend. But we have provided and continue to provide significant quantities of personal protective equipment to our staff, to the whole sector workforce, again, to keep them safe, to carers, family carers of individuals and loved ones, and that PPE now comes through, thankfully, with very regular supply from Welsh Government, and the procurement arrangements around that are resolved. We have priority testing and testing for our key workers. So, for example, workers within residential care homes are tested on a weekly basis to ensure that they're safe and continue to provide care and support services. And on an all Wales basis, there's been a workforce risk assessment, and this has supported us to understand who of our workforce colleagues are most at risk from the virus, and to support different duties for those individuals who would be at risk if they were providing direct care services. And all of this we've done in very close working relationship with our trade union colleagues. So if we just move on to the next slide, I think Andrew's going to come in now and talk a little bit more for the next few slides about the wellbeing part of the Directorate.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Laura.
Good morning. Just to remind members, a year or two ago, the Prevention and Wellbeing Service was created within Social Services and Wellbeing, and I think it's quite an interesting situation that many of the facility-based services such as leisure venues and theatres and libraries and community centres also sit within the Social Services and Wellbeing Department. And I think part of the aspiration had been around firstly bringing people together, which became more of a challenge from late March, but also giving more of a people focus, I think, within premises that Bridgend operates. So in terms of the key partnerships that we have, I think at a UK governmental level, our Halo Leisure and our trust facilities were locked down by government in March. That brought some challenges in terms of being able to operate as normal, how to support staff through that process. But I think, again, this story of trying to find what is most important that needs to continue for the more vulnerable, and how to do that. So the National Exercise Referral Scheme, which would have supported people referred from GPs, could have ceased mid-flow. That was continued, so another 136 participants have been supported during the first phase of the lockdown, with 4,500 plus contact points. Probably like to mention that during this period, Halo developing their digital resources, the Halo at Home program's been provided free of charge, and including targeted support for people that were able to connect with those kinds of programs. The dementia supportive programs that we've perhaps shared with members before, whether it's dementia friendly swimming or some of the other social activities, obviously challenges in running that in centres, but remote support has been provided for carer and cared for. And I think one point I would mention, not peculiar to this programme, because digital exclusion is highlighted nationally for those that can't engage, but the telephone, I think, has come into its own in having regular contact with people, helping to help people talk about how they're feeling, helping to motivate people, and that has proven to be a positive experience for those people that have been traditionally engaging in community. If I can have the next one, please. Use of green space, I think, came into its own during this. More people encouraged to take daily exercise. Bringarrow Park being seen once travel restrictions were reduced or removed. Over 114,000 visits to Bringaru Park. Probably one of the biggest attendances recorded. I think as soon as I went able to resume the books to your doorstep service, that has restarted, supporting the more vulnerable and the more lonely and isolated people. And libraries, in terms of whilst libraries saw challenges in terms of not being able to open, not being able to physically issue book stock or resources, 87% increase on previous year in use of digital resources, of which there are quite a few. And in terms of working with both Halo and Awen, recognising the importance, I think, of how Bridgend will need to support physical and mental well-being, and working with those organisations to try and map out what that will look like and what types of services might be needed as we go forward. Next slide, please. So I think working with the third sector to support people who are shielding, I probably need to give major credit to the work with BAV and the Building Resilient Communities programme that we started probably between 2 and 2.5 years ago, because we had secured a range of investments from integrated care funding to transformation funding. We had a range of roles through community navigators and our community coordinators and community network builders that were able to refocus, repurpose and support people. I think during the first phase of lockdown, over 3,600 touch points for people needing different things. 2,261 prescriptions supported, shopping, food banks, telephone befriending, and in terms of shielding checks where we'd failed to actually make contact, I think by telephone, with people, over 1,100 shielding checks of door-to-door checkups on people to make sure that they were okay. And that has moved into what is now the Protect work stream with BAVO and BCBC working very closely on a weekly basis, and us playing a part in a regional discussion to understand how Bridgend, Merthyr and RCT can do what they can to protect the more vulnerable. Thank you. And the next one, please. So this slide was used for something different recently. I think the work that we've done with our Super Ages programme has been selected as a Bevan exemplar project in terms of prudent healthcare, supporting people in different ways. We'd established quite a large demand from vulnerable older people that wanted to take part in community-based activities. The bits that I would highlight on this slide, our Active at Home programme, this started in April of this year, and very quickly realised that we'd started with a digital platform, so you could stream activities and you could engage online that many of our older adults were not able to engage with our technology. So providing equivalent support, but using hard copy workbooks, having to produce DVDs, because most of our older adults were working with that level of technology, and using that to support some sense of community and some access to opportunities during this period. We also piloted some telephone-based home mentoring for people, and suddenly found that older adults that we were supporting had other issues to deal with, particularly in the first cohort, sensory impairment, so sight loss being a particular issue. But the telephone mentoring program worked pretty well. I think we have one case study of a lady that was sufficiently motivated to want to apply for a guide dog and was supported to do so by the activity lead. And I think the Park Lives bit on the end shows as the world is starting to open up, we've started to learn from programs of encouraging people to come back outdoors in safe settings, working with them to understand what it needs to look like so that their confidence remains and they continue to attend. Next slide, please. And in terms of some of the other programs that I guess one of the consequences of the pandemic, it's created immense challenges, but also opportunities to develop some learning and insight. So the Feel Good for Life programme, which is supporting people with dementia and cognitive impairment and carers, that received the UK Active Award for innovation and supporting people through physical activity. We've developed a pilot programme that started in sheltered accommodation to reduce falls or fears of falling, and working with our partners to roll that out when the time is right and safe to 2 additional parts of the county borough. The digital piece has come across, hopefully in what I've been saying, as a challenge as well as an opportunity, working with Wales Cooperative and Digital Communities Wales, carers. We've got young families, parent carers, plus adult carers here, of trying to create networks of interest, having supportive people with like interests, helping to get more people connected, more people skilled, I think, in doing things that are important to them, not just the transactional, but being able to access shopping, but actually having friendship groups and ability to host conversations. The Stronger Together Bridgend platform, through our work with our and our communities, almost 3,000 weekly hits being achieved there, of showing how culture and entertainment and local creativity is engaging for people, and that has grown and grown and grown. And finally, some minor investments that we secured to try and make our venues more accessible when we are able to operate as we would have pre-lockdown. Next slide, please. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so the next set of slides take you, I think, up to date with where we are. So the first slides that we presented really were the response over that first period. The next slides, which we'll try and do quite quickly, just tell you where we are now as we've moved through the pandemic. So if we move on to the next one, please. These are the next slide really set out the principles that we're working to at the moment, which continue to balance safety and well-being, also with rights. And I think as we moved through the pandemic, the rights of the people that we work with, of children, young people, older people, were very much promoted, particularly I would say by the Older Persons Commissioner and the Children's Commissioner, to make sure that with all the focus on safety and well-being, that we did understand the rights of people to normal family life, for example, and one of the areas where that's been particularly challenging has been around care home visiting. So you can see some of those policy dilemmas played out in very, very practical terms. We have also, as we've moved through, because it does feel quite different now to the first phase of the pandemic, been looking at what business as usual continues, what other priorities are important both to the council and to Welsh Government and others, as we move out of just a pure emergency planning and response mode. And that's been pretty challenging because whilst at the end of the summer into the autumn period, things were pretty positive. You know, we saw lower rates of COVID in communities. As we work through now, obviously it is a really challenging period in terms of the level of COVID within our communities and a very different context within which we're working. And what we're trying to do is to use evidence and data to keep our system as dynamic, to assess risk dynamically, and to be responsive in the way that we respond to the needs of our citizens. The advice to people who are shielding is slightly different this time round, but we know that there are people who continue to be more vulnerable to the virus, and continuing to work with our third sector organisations to support adults and children and carers and communities. So the next slide then talks about that continuing partnership response, and I mentioned this at the start, that emergency planning brings with it a range of different infrastructures, and the Local Resilience Forum, which is on the South Wales Police footprint, is one of those. We've worked and continue to work very, very closely with Welsh Government. I mentioned Welsh Government and the work they've done with the NHS around procurement of PPE. That's critical to us. But also, as Laura mentioned, in terms of guidance, guidance that's come out that at one point was very frequently reissued, but continues to be reviewed in a very timely way as circumstances change. So, for example, around the children's services operating model, everything that we've done has been in accordance with Welsh Government guidance. Hospital discharge, very strong Welsh Government guidance there, and we've worked both with Welsh Government but also co-productively across Wales with ADSS Cymru around policy developments. We operate as part of an incident management team, which is on the Cwmtaf Morgannwg footprint, and that's been particularly important around closed settings and how we've managed outbreaks of COVID in care homes, in the prison population, and working very closely in those incident management teams with public health colleagues and with public protection colleagues. And I can't speak highly enough of the work of shared regulatory services, who I knew when I was down in Cardiff as well, but the work that they've done with care homes particularly has been absolutely fantastic in terms of infection protection and control. Something which is significantly different at this phase of pandemic management from the first is trace, track and protect. Andrew mentioned it in terms of the protect work stream, but obviously one of the contexts we're dealing with is that significant numbers of our workforce at any moment in time will be required to self-isolate as a consequence of being contacted by the trace and track element of that service. That's positive in that it is obviously preventing the spread of the virus, but it is something which is different from the first phase of the virus, and does mean that in terms of our workforce contingency plans, we are having to be very reactive and responsive and look at other workforce that we can call on. We operate as part, as I said, of the council bronze, silver and gold meetings, and we also, because we are integrated services, sit in the health board equivalent of those meetings. Safeguarding meetings, we had a meeting of the regional safeguarding board last Friday, and as Laura mentioned earlier on in the pandemic, there were bronze and silver meetings as part of that as well. And we work very closely with our providers, so always remembering that 75% of social care services in Bridgend are not provided directly by us as a council, but by independent sector partners, so we've got to work through very strong relationships with them. We work as part of the response and protection of care homes. We've got a regional care home steering group and strategic group, and there's an action plan that we're working through following some work commissioned from the Institute of Public Care by Welsh Government to make sure that we've got the right range of supports in for care homes, and we continue to work very closely with third sector colleagues. Just moving on to the next slide, please. I won't repeat everything that's on this slide, some of which I picked up earlier, but I will just emphasise that ongoing support for workforce. As we've moved through the pandemic, elements of our workforce have found working from home over an extended period of time very challenging. So we're looking and working on business cases about how we can support phased return to the office, and we obviously work very closely across the council with our early help services in education and family support, and making sure that we're continuing to review which services we can operate safely. And I mentioned day opportunities and respite early on, but how we can support more face-to-face visiting, recognising that balance of risk and all the protections that we can put in place around our workforce. So just moving on to the next slide, please. This is a slide which I think summarises how we've worked with and continued to work with the social care sector. So I mentioned just a moment ago the fact that 75% of our social care is not provided directly by us as a council. We support distribution of personal protective equipment out to the social care sector. We administer the Welsh Government Hardship Fund, which has supported the additional costs within the social care sector of operating during the pandemic. During the first phase, there was an additional 40 million across the whole of Wales, which Welsh Government invested into the social care sector, and there's further money now coming through in terms of local government support from Welsh Government. members will be aware of the statutory sick pay scheme and the Welsh Government, again, making up the difference between SSP and what people would normally be paid when they work in the social care sector. And again, we administer that. We're working very closely with colleagues across the region. The good news is the vaccination programme has started, and that will be delivered to our social care workforce as well as health workforce. So we're supporting the organisation of that and identifying the staff with our providers, as well as the care home testing programme. And there's a pilot of one care home in the county borough for family members to be tested, as well as the testing of staff and residents. And one of the sort of most important things we've done recently is to work through a risk assessment and support care home individual RI risk assessments around care home visiting. There's a lot of information and support and guidance out there, and trying to make that succinctly available to individuals and to individual providers is important, and that at any time we've got a very live situation report to know which providers are able to operate and which may not be in a position where they're able to take new people on because of their own workforce needing to self-isolate and acting in accordance with guidance. And whilst we do a lot of this locally, we also work very closely with our regional colleagues and particularly our colleagues in the Health Board as well. So if we move on to the next slide, please. This is just a summary slide. I think hopefully what's coming across is that a lot has been achieved. A lot was achieved very quickly, and as we've moved through, what we've done is to reflect and adapt and to I think dynamically assess risk as we've moved through. But the key issues for us are that ongoing management of the pandemic and making sure that we've got a sustainable sector going forward. So if we just move on to the next slide, I think there's a few more slides here from Laura.
Hi, okay, thank you. I think this slide just really sort of outlines for you really what we've continued to do in terms of not just delivering our sort of day-to-day operational services, but also continuing with the improvements and developments that were already underway prior to the pandemic as well. So just to say, as I indicated earlier, really, we've continued to embed our MASH model with our partner agencies, and we've sustained those arrangements throughout the pandemic with those agencies as well, and continued to run all of the services from the MASH and routinely evaluate those. Just to say as well, we've over the last year we've continued to enhance our early help services as well with colleagues in the Education and Family Support Directorate. We've extended family support services, edge of care services, and we've continued to commission the Reflect service on a regional footprint, and the Baby in Mind service as well has been really successful. And some of you may already be aware that we were actually a winner of an accolade recently as well in relation to that service, so that was really great. We've also appointed 4 reunification workers now in the service. Over the last 6 months, most of their work has been carried out with children in placements where there's been some fragility, and they've been supporting carers to maintain those arrangements so there's been no disruption for children and young people. And moving forward, they'll also be focusing more on their reunification role with a view to achieving alternative forms of permanence for children. We've also continued to scope out our regional MAP service for Cwmtaf Morgannwg as well, and we'll be going out to tender for that service in the new year. Our residential remodelling work has also continued, and it hasn't been without its challenges, but it is settled at the moment, and we have continued to place children in our new residential provision and transition some of those children as well to longer term arrangements as well. We've also, as you know, we have our child disability transition team in place now for young people up to the age of 25 years, and our next phase is to enhance that further to become a more integrated service with partners. So if we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the detail within this slide, but I just think I really love this diagram actually, because I think this really reflects and provides an overview of the accommodation options that we have in place for children and young people in Bridgend now, and I think it really reflects and demonstrates the focus that we've given to this area and the developments as well, and the range of provision to suit individual needs of children and young people and the context that they're living in really. So I won't go through that in detail, but happy to take any questions about what's on that slide later on. So if we go on to the next one. Okay, I think this slide really is just providing you with an overview of the activity of the social work teams and the model and the ways of working we've put in place during the pandemic as well. So, and I think I said right at the outset that we haven't stopped doing anything. We've continued discharging all of our statutory duties, and we've continued to work with children and young people and their families. I think this just really gives you an idea of the volume of activity that we've continued to carry out in children's social care. So it gives you the total number of assessments that we carried out in those first 6 months of the pandemics, the number of inquiries, you know, nearly 4,000 visits to children, yes, happening remotely to begin with, but now face to face, and things like child protection and case conferences and core group meetings for children on our child protection register still happening during those 6 months and still happening right now as well. So if we go to the next slide, please. I think what I wanted to outline here really and reassure you about is that we've continued to focus on the areas that had been identified as requiring improvement as well. So despite the challenges that we've been facing, we have achieved those improvements as well. So Scrutiny Committee will be aware that one of the challenges over recent years has been carrying out our assessments within statutory timescales, and in 1920 our performance was 74%, whereas the target was 85%. So in the first 6 months of this year we were achieving a performance of just over 96%, and that continues as well. Similarly, we've continued to improve our performance in relation to visits to children as well, visits to children on the child protection register and children who are looked after by us. And I think also we've continued to place more children locally in our own residential provision and registered provision as well. And we haven't had to place any children this year in any unregulated placements, which is really good news for us. Okay, if you'd like to go to the next slide, which is, I'm going to hand back to Claire, please.
Yeah, the last few slides from us are just providing, I think, some additional and similar to what Laura's just done for children's services, assurance for Scrutiny around the progress that continues to be made about strategic priorities in adult services and performance. So in terms of the strategic priorities, we obviously are adjusting some of those strategic priorities to take into account the impact on our populations and a lot of our very vulnerable populations of the pandemic. And the Health Board have implemented a new structure, and one of the acronyms we're getting used to is ILG. It means Integrated Locality Group, and it's fantastic for us here in Bridgend, because what it means is there's a senior team that is responsible for Bridgend hospitals, for Bridgend primary, community, mental health services and children's services. So we're able to develop really clear priorities for our locality with that team, building on the success that we already have through integrated services. So we are taking forward a number of remodelling exercises with our integrated services, a number of which were heralded in the older persons inspection that we had last year, and that includes the remodelling of our support at home services, which have been so critical throughout the pandemic, and continuing to work very, very closely with our health board colleagues around making sure that there's always a timely flow through of people between hospital and community, so people aren't delayed in hospital for any time longer than they need to be, and indeed that we're avoiding people going into hospital unless they really need to be there. If we move on to the next slide, what this slide just highlights for you is that in terms of recognising the needs of our population going forward, the impact of COVID both directly and indirectly on people with a range of health conditions is absolutely clear. So we know about long COVID and the fact that there will be people who will require rehabilitation as a consequence of that. We also know, for example, for our shielded population, that being in their own homes for such a long time will have impacted not just on mental health and well-being, but physical health and well-being as well. So our rehab and working very, very closely with the exercise referral scheme that Andrew talked about the community connectors who have such a positive impact on mental health and well-being is going to be absolutely critical as we move through from response into recovery. We're continuing to work in close partnership with our colleagues in the prison in the secure estate, and a big piece of work there to look at the health and social care input into Park Prison going forward. And we also know that there's been a lot of really innovative and creative work during the pandemic around some of our really vulnerable populations, our homeless population in particular, and we're working with regional colleagues to recommission substance misuse services again so that they can impact and be taken on board the best evidence to support people in terms of the accommodation and the support they need going forward. The next couple of slides then just give some assurance in terms of the level of activity. I think there were some concerns as we moved through into lockdown and lots of people wanting assurance, including Care Inspectorate Wales and Welsh Government, that people's rights to statutory social services were continuing to be met. And I think that this slide here from Adult Services gives you, for the first 2 quarters of the year, the scale of activity which was undertaken. And the next slide as well just builds on that. In terms of business as usual, really, and continuing, as Laura said, some of it virtually to start with, increasingly face-to-face to make sure that we were assessing people, we were putting in place services to meet needs, that we were doing that largely in a timely way, and that people's care and support was continuing to be in place for them. And then the very last slide is just another summary slide, really. I think that the pandemic has highlighted the many strengths in Bridgend, that Bridgend was in a good position to respond to the many challenges because of the strong services that were already in place. Those strong partnerships have put Bridgend in a really good place because the council and social services within the council couldn't have done this and can't do this on our own. One thing that the pandemic has absolutely highlighted is that we are one social care sector. I've emphasised a number of times the fact that the social care sector out there, as well as the in-house services, which have been so fundamental in keeping people safe, protected and connected, and the value of the social care sector, I think has been recognised, and we need to continue to recognise it as we move forward. There are significant current challenges, as we all know, but we are seeing the beginning of the end with the vaccine rollout, and that's something which is important for us to hold on to and to be part of that planning. We know there's lots of challenges coming through strategically in terms of the budget, the population change, the changes in the need and our workforce, and our focus in social services is going to continue to be on our workforce, because recognising if we're in the right place and frontline are in the right place, then we're in a good place to do what we need to do around our people, prevention, practice and commissioning. So that's it. Apologies, it's a lot of slides, but it's been quite the 9 months really, and we just wanted to make sure that you had a flavour of everything that was going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Yes, I do realise it was a lot of slides, but I think what members will also realise, you were covering the whole spectrum of social services, unlike our usual one-item agenda. You have to try and cover everything. Can I thank Laura and Andrew as well for their input. I've had 3 councillors indicating that they would like to ask a question, and the first one is Councillor David White.
First of all, I'd like to thank them for the presentation, but also pass on my appreciations to all the staff for the wonderful work they've been doing over the last 9 months. You know, it'd be they've gone beyond what they should have done, you know. And you know, on a personal level, as a shielder, I truly do appreciate the work that's gone on with Bravo as well, and you know, so and I also had a phone call from BCBC around in my March time, making sure I was okay, and you know, I can't fault the work on a personal level that BCBC have done in regards to shielders. I'd like to ask a question in regards to the contacts with children and their parents. Will this be tier level appropriate? Because as we move on, you know, we could be moving on to tier 4 soon, and there could be a change of where we work. So will the contacts with parents, you know, will this be considered within the tiers that the Welsh Government have set? And also, are the risk assessments, are they a live document? And what kind of protection are in place, like on a daily basis, before the contacts start? Are you checking with the parents and the foster carers that the children are safe and there's no signs of COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I suppose I'll try to talk through what our arrangements have been, what's been happening, what continues to happen, and I think that will hopefully respond to the different strands of your question, really. So as you know, as I indicated, in April we had to make that difficult decision to stop all face-to-face contact, but we did continue to facilitate all of our contact remotely. And when we were permitted to then resume some face-to-face contact, we identified our priority groups. So it was things like, you know, newborn children where parents had been separated from them. It was those contacts that were prioritised. Ones where we wanted to rehabilitate children home to their birth families. Final contacts for children where they were being placed for adoption, and contacts that were really impacted upon. So things like contacts between siblings with very close relationships and things. But like I say, we're in a position at the moment where all of our contacts have been resumed. However, what we have been following is the guidance that came out from Welsh Government in relation to a 2-stage assessment. So what we now do is we have to, for every situation we're assessing, firstly we do an assessment of necessity, so we deem if a contact is necessary, and then we do an assessment of risk. And at the moment we flip that around, so now we say all children have contact, and if we don't think they should have contact, you do that 2-stage assessment. So you do an assessment to outline why it's not necessary or appropriate, and the risks associated with that. In terms of, and those assessments are absolutely very dynamic as well, so continually reviewed by the practitioners and managers involved. In terms of any future restrictions and tiers, etc., that you've referenced, yes, we revisit our guidance every time there's a change. So, for example, when we had the local fire break in Bridgend, what we did for those 2 weeks was we developed an addendum to our service plan. So we had in place specific arrangements for that 2-week period. And then we went back to our sort of existing service delivery plan that we had in place at the end of those two weeks. But whenever there's a change and whenever there's new guidance coming through from Welsh Government, we straight away review our current local arrangements as well, and we will do that absolutely if things change in the new year, which we are anticipating. I think in terms of making the environment safe, in the beginning when we started to resume contacts, we tried to do those outdoors wherever possible so that we could achieve social distancing, etc. That's not as easy now, obviously, in the winter months, and like I indicated earlier, we do have venues to provide contact now between children and their families. But yes, we have worked very closely with colleagues in corporate landlord, in health and safety. We've consulted environmental health, etc. So yes, we sort of, we do ensure there are deep cleans, etc. in between every sessions. Staff are provided with all necessary PPE, etc. And children and families are also supported in that respect as well, and yet the arrangements are as safe as they can be, and we do adhere to all of the guidelines in that respect.
Thank you, Laura. I think Councillor White would like to come back in with a small question. David?
Another local authority that's actually putting measures in place, because we know that a lot of parents will want to, and children will want to swap gifts this year, looked after children. So are there any safety measures in place? I know of another local authority have actually told their workers to make sure any gifts from parents and children to parents, or parents to children, are actually quarantined for 72 hours. Is this similar in Bridgend at all?
We're actually in the process now of having the discussions about how we're going to pass on gifts to children and young people. So that is a discussion that's taking place at the moment, because it's becoming a live issue for us now, where parents are wanting to pass on gifts, but those are the conversations now we'll be having with the parents and with the people those children live with normally as well, in terms of how they will be passed on. And I think it is a real challenge as well. I think I've spoken to staff about this, you know, if children move towards having physical contact, especially young children with their parents, it's difficult. We wouldn't want to intervene and say you can't, you know, sort of cuddle or have physical contact with your parent. It's about how we and the parents manage those situations, and I think it will be similar with gifts as well. So whereas, you know, some parents will want to just hand their children gifts and things, and it's about how we risk assess those individual situations really, but those discussions are taking place at the moment.
Oh, thank you, Laura, for both questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. The next councillor is indicated as Councillor Carolyn Webster. Carolyn?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just briefly add on to Councillor White's point there about court-appointed contacts for looked after children, please? It's my understanding that we were a lot slower in rearranging contact than some other boroughs. Was there a reason behind that delay? Namely, Swansea and Cardiff, we were falling behind with the times for that. But also, I'd be grateful if you could consider adding another particular group to the cases of children who need to see their parents quickly, and that would be children with special needs, because it's impossible to engage children with special needs via a screen on Zoom. So if I can come back to other things as well, I've got a declaration of interest regarding the Child Disability and Transition team. My son has just landed on that, so there's personal interest there. But I have a question regarding that as well, in that how are children identified to go on to that? Because a lot of children with disabilities, even children in special schools, do not have a social worker. So how are they identified as to go on to that programme? I'd like to ask, please, Claire, how many adult care homes have not allowed indoor visits yet, if any? And actually, I'd like to give my compliments to the service for a couple of things. One is, I won't name them, but the commissioning manager has had very good reports from managers of care homes for the way that he has been working hard throughout this pandemic. And also I'd like to compliment the council on their swift payments process, because you are topping the league from what I understand from other local authorities, so well done on that. And Andrew, you mentioned a lot of the organisations which have helped out, but I think we need to mention the people who are not part of organisations which have contributed to the well-being of people across the borough. And I'd like to give a particular shout out to the people who organised the bus stop library in Porthcawl, which raised a lot of people's morale. There's a lot there. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Caroline. Okay, Laura?
Okay, I think I've made a note of most of those things. So if I firstly just
quite
say,
a few, I realised.
yeah, that's fine. In terms of your observation, Councillor Webster, in terms of children with disabilities or communication issues because of their additional needs, in being a priority for that face-to-face contact, I can take that back absolutely. But like I say, I think we're at the moment our sort of consistent principle now is that all children will have face-to-face contact whenever it's obviously necessary and safe to do so. So that is our principle for all of our children who are looked after now. But I will feed that back in case we need to revert back to identifying priority groups in the future. In terms of Cardiff and Swansea, I think it's difficult for me to comment on that because as all Wales heads of children's services, we have, we've been having in contact throughout the pandemic, and I've particularly been working closely with my counterparts in our region, in RCT and Merthyr, and it hasn't been flagged with me that there have been delays in Bridgend compared to other local authorities, or definitely not significant delays. And yes, we have had some families raising issues directly to us or through local members in terms of frustrations over their contact arrangements being resumed, and we've responded to all of those individual queries, but none referencing other authorities. But I'm not aware of that issue really, so it's difficult for me to comment. And like I say, we have been having those discussions, and also Welsh Government have been in regular contact with heads of services, regional groups and across Wales, and they haven't flagged with us any issues about our practice being inconsistent with other authorities in Wales either. So I'd want to reassure you that that hasn't been identified as an issue by Welsh Government colleagues who've had that oversight as well. In terms of the transition team, you know that the model that we have now is that we have a children with disabilities and transition team with oversight of one team manager. So to receive services from the children with disabilities team, children firstly are subject to, they have an assessment undertaken of their care and support needs, and then if they're receiving services from that team and it's identified that they will require ongoing support as they transition into adulthood, then that team will undertake further assessments. So I think in terms of your question about how they access that provision, I think that's a very general description of how that could happen. But if you've got any queries about individual cases or issues you'd want to explore further, then I would be happy to have those conversations with you separately, or put you in touch with a manager who can have that conversation.
I appreciate that, Laura. It's not an individual case. This is actually noted across many people, but I'd certainly welcome if you want to give me a call. We can have a chat another time about that. That's no problem at all.
That's great, thank you. I think I've covered off all of the children's ones.
Yes, that's right. Claire has indicated that she wishes to come in regarding care home visiting. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. In terms of care home visiting, what we've done is to develop a risk assessment at a regional level, which looks at all the various risks around care home visiting based on the level of community acquired infection, for example, provision of PPE, etc., and to look at the risk mitigations, and that risk assessment was considered by the incident management team, which is chaired by the Director of Public Health, and then we could share that with care homes, and care home responsible individuals then need to undertake their own risk assessment. Now, one of the challenges that we have at the moment, and we've had throughout the pandemic, is that if a care home has either a staff member or a resident who tests positive for COVID-19, then in accordance with standard outbreak management, standard public health outbreak management, be it COVID-19 or norovirus or flu, then the care home goes into what's called a lockdown for the period of 2 incubations of the virus. So that has been 28 days, and that's currently under review from Welsh Government. And if a care home is in, we call it, I suppose colloquially, a Public Health Wales lockdown, because they currently have the virus in either a staff member or a resident, then they can't facilitate visits, and they can't facilitate those face-to-face visits. So at the time that I last had an update on that situation, which was the 9th of December last week, we had 9 homes who were in that situation. One home who potentially was in that situation, but was awaiting confirmation. There was one home where the RI had taken a decision not to facilitate visits at that point. We had 6 homes who were facilitating visits or just working up to be able to facilitate visits, and 2 homes who were part of the pilot for rapid testing. So that's out of the 20 homes independent sector homes. We'd also put in arrangements with our 4 in-house homes to be able to facilitate visits as well. So it has been a sort of moving position, and the reason I caveated with the date is that any day, because of that weekly testing of care home staff and visit, at any point any care home might have somebody who's asymptomatic who tests positive, and then they move into that instant management situation and aren't able to facilitate visiting for that period.
Thank you, Claire. Do you wish to come back in, Caroline, or are you happy with that?
No, I'm sort of happy with that. But I do understand the challenges that they're up against, and there are new different systems that care homes have. It's been on the news about you can have like little outside what are they called, marquees with separate things on it. Is the borough facilitating that kind of thing? And again with Christmas, I just want to hear some kind of reassurance for members of families who really need to see their families.
It is a really challenging situation. I think it's one of the things which we found most difficult during the whole pandemic is people not being able to see their families for periods of time. Obviously there's been innovation through digital platforms and iPads and other things going into care homes to support for some form of communication, but that clearly has not been as optimal as being able to see family members face to face. In terms of the pods, Welsh Government are investing in a pod in one of our care homes. It's actually one of our in-house care homes here in Bridgend. Other care homes are better able to facilitate face-to-face visiting within the physical environment than others, which is why that individual risk assessment by responsible individuals is so important. We're working prepared and willing to support around visiting, but we continue, as you say, through our commissioning team and highlighted some of the good practice there with providers to work very closely with the care homes to support positive practice as far as we are able to, and to look at how we promote that good practice where safe visiting with use of PPE, testing of visitors now starting to be rolled out as well, can be facilitated.
Thank you. And just briefly as well, because ironically I couldn't understand my handwriting in my little list. Andrew mentioned about the digitally excluded, and to my knowledge, we've only had one bit of information pushed through doors, and that was delivered as part of Kia's communication distribution. I'm just wondering if you're going to do another physical bit of paper distribution for those people who do not have access to computers or are not capable of using them.
Yeah, I certainly think it's something that we need to look at again. We had some sessions with carers relatively recently, and it was clear that some were comfortable with using digital platforms and others less so. So I do think we need to look at complementing what we do digitally with some more sort of physical newsletters and correspondence.
Thank you, Claire. Nicole has indicated that she would like to come in on this, and is Councillor Burnett, Cabinet Member. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Carolyn, I'm totally with you on the need to reach out to those that aren't as well as connected digitally, and through the Evergreen charity has been producing magazines, and we've been working within social services and within the RSLs to try and distribute out physical magazines with advice and wellbeing content out to as many people who aren't connected as possible. So if you know of any individuals, it's very difficult getting around GDPR to get to individuals that aren't on our radar, but if any councillors know of anybody who requires or would enjoy having information in a paper format, then contact me and I I can add them to our distribution list.
It would certainly be worthy speaking with the Carers Centre, because they do actually send out a physical newsletter, and of course they've got a vast database then that you could distribute via them, so it's worth contacting them.
Thank you. Yes, that's all ongoing. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Nicole. I'm going to move now to Councillor Hussain, who has a question. Thank you, Altaf.
Thank you very much, Chair. Great presentation. Thanks for presenting this. And I think it may be partly what Councillor White and Councillor Webster asked. But my question is, as a corporate parent, is it possible to listen to our disadvantaged children and young people and ensure they are in safe environment? And are they all placed in Bridgend? Thank you.
Altaf, do you wish to take that, Laura?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm putting my video back on.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Okay, thank you. In terms of listening to our children and young people and ensuring their safety, we're absolutely committed to doing that. And I think hopefully I've indicated during the presentation that we've endeavoured to do that as much as we always have throughout the pandemic, even though we've had to do it differently. So we've stayed in touch with all of our children and young people, be that remotely but also face to face. We've continued to sort of be in touch with them as often as we would have before. And in fact, it's been quite interesting for quite a number of our looked after children, and particularly our care leavers as well. They've given us some positive feedback about some of the new ways of working as well, and I think they see some of these approaches as more modern and enjoy being in touch with us through technology as well. So I think we've learned quite a bit about that, and we will continue with these some new ways of working as well. In terms of ensuring children's safety, and I think one of the things that I think social workers were particularly anxious about at the beginning of the pandemic was about not seeing children on the child protection register as often as we normally would as well. And I think so what we did was we also worked very closely with partners to check in how often they were seeing those children, and even people like the people who were delivering meals to children and families as well. They would feed back to us their observations of those children as well. So we were working really closely together with all of the safe adults and professionals around those children who were in contact with them and observing them as well. So that was something that we put in place. I think also to say that lots of our children on the child protection register attended the hubs that were in place as well, and that's why we had that specific hub provision throughout the school summer holidays as well. That was hub provision particularly for our most vulnerable children on the register and some of our looked after children as well, to be able to have that space and time with, if you like, safe adults that they could speak to if they did have any worries or concerns about where they were living and any abuse that they were suffering as well. So that's some examples really of how we've continued to give children a voice and an opportunity to speak to people. And in terms of our looked after children, we do continue to have some children placed outside of Bridgend, but that number is coming down, and I think compared to a number of authorities, I think our performance is very positive in that respect as well. Nearly all of the children that we have from Bridgend placed outside of Wales are placed outside of Wales not because they're with independent fostering agencies or in residential provision, but it's because they're living with relatives. So that's something that we wouldn't want to change. But most of our children are placed within Bridgend, and it continues to be a sort of a priority commitment for us as well to recruit more and more carers within the borough to be able to look after our children for us as well as corporate parents.
That's good to hear, Laura. Do you wish to come back, Altaf?
Just a small point about those who are outside Bridgend, in other areas, maybe outside Wales. How do you remain in touch with them?
Yeah, we would still be contacting those children in the same way. So in terms of, as I've indicated, where it was remote contact, we would have continued with that remote contact with those children. But in terms of our statutory visits to children who are looked after, and us resuming those visits now face to face, we would do that wherever they will live in, but obviously having to take into account the restrictions as well. But we've continued to see those children and speak to those children at the same frequency as all of our looked after children.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Laura. Right, I don't have anybody else who wishes to ask a question. I've got one quick question, and then Councillor Burnett wishes to come back in. My question is, there was a reference, I believe, by Claire to a change in operating models of day services. I was just wondering what impact this has had on carers for whom perhaps that was the only respite that they actually got was the day services, and if you could just briefly update me on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really challenging area, and what we've done with day services is to look at how we can maximise the number of people who are supported, but in a safe, socially distanced way. So that does mean that there's less people coming each day, and some people will have less days. So there's two ways that we've tried to mitigate that. By trying to make sure that we're being very fair in terms of those that can come in to service, and secondly to look at other support, be it outreach support of workers, be it keeping in touch with carers, that we can do to mitigate the risk. And the other thing I would say is that we have continued to operate day provision even with all the challenges that we've got at the moment, with the levels of COVID. Some areas across Wales have stopped operating day services. We continue to operate day services for exactly the reasons that you've highlighted, Councillor Green. So there will be some impact on people, but we're trying to mitigate that by keeping the service going, and by putting in place other means such as outreach and keeping in touch with carers.
I'm glad to hear that, Claire, because I know how vital these services are to people. Councillor Nicole Burnett, you would like to come in and make a comment?
I think Councillor Webster would like to ask another question on that in the instant messaging. So I'll come in after Councillor Webster, if that's okay.
It's only just popped into mind. Okay, Caroline.
Thanks, both.
Briefly ask your question, please. Thank you.
Another thing that cropped up during my engagement with residents across the county during the initial lockdown and after that was the language used in expressing how people could access PAs and the support networks, the support provision which they had for their own family's well-being. It was very confused, and also it wasn't very easy to understand for people with language difficulties. So I'm just wondering if if we do enter something else or a different tier with different rules, whether those rules could be expressed in easier language and actually sent out to people who have PAs, so they'd know whether they can have their PA to come in and help them, please.
Thank you, Caroline. Is that really for noting?
Yes, I think so.
Or does anybody wish to? Yeah, I think the point is well made. The simpler the message, the easier, and more people would understand. Okay, thank you, Caroline. Right, Nicole, it's back to you, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I just want to say, obviously, this is my first scrutiny as Cabinet Member for Social Services and Early Help. It's been an amazing few months. and all I can say is I can't thank enough Claire, Laura, Jackie, Andrew and their respective teams. I've met a lot of them personally, face to face. I know how much they care, and I can't stress enough how focused we are and how focused the directorate is on individuals, and I'm absolutely, it hurts to see how hard they work, for some of them for so little financial reward, and how much they take their responsibilities so personally, and these have been really challenging times, but I really want members to appreciate that they are more challenging now than they were at the beginning. The spread of COVID in the community and the impact that it's having on our staffing capacity is worrying. And so our teams are continuing. They're not going to get a 2-week break over the Christmas holidays. You can't leave an elderly person to get themselves out of bed. You know, the stress is continuing, and I just want to thank our team members for adapting as quickly as they possibly could to all the new regulations that come out, and all the chopping and the changing. And just to assure members that I have the same concerns as you do, and that I'm asking those questions regularly to make sure that the rights of our residents are considered, but also that our staff feel as supported as possible. So I'm holding my member surgery this afternoon, so if any of you have got any further questions or comments, or just want to chat about the situation, it's a huge directorate, there's an awful lot going on. I'm happy to speak to anybody this afternoon in further detail. Thank you, Chair, and thank you everybody.
Thank you for that, Nicole. I think we're all with you on appreciating the difficulties that all our staff have experienced over the last few months, really. Now it's been very difficult. Now, I realise this was a huge topic, but all members will receive a copy of the presentation. So I'm quite sure that if you have any questions that haven't occurred to you now, you'd be able to email in and ask officers any questions on it. Okay, thank you. Right, it just remains for me to thank all of the invitees very much for their attendance here today. We do appreciate it. We realise how busy you are, but stay safe and thank you. Right, we'll move on now to the Forward Work Programme update, and I will ask the Scrutiny Officer to take us through item 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If you just bear with me a second. Okay, so members may recall that the Council has been advised that the local government financial settlement from Welsh Government will be later than expected, and therefore the scrutiny of the medium-term financial strategy will be considered by scrutiny committees after Cabinet considers the draft proposals on the 19th of January. Instead of the December cycle of meetings as originally planned, as set out in the table in paragraph 4.1 of this report, and following approval at November Council, the dates for scrutiny meetings have been moved to the following. Of January at 10 o'clock, it will be the draft MTFS for education, family support and communities. And on the 21st of January at 10 o'clock, it will be the draft MTFS for social services and wellbeing and the Chief Executive's Directorate. I take members then to paragraph 4.5. The committee is reminded of the criteria form which members can use to propose further items for the Forward Work Programme, which the committee can then consider for prioritisation at a future meeting. The criteria form emphasises the need to consider issues such as impact, risk, performance, budget and community perception when identifying topics for investigation, and to ensure strategic responsibility for scrutiny and maximises the opportunity for impact. So I'm not sure at this moment whether members have any thoughts about anything they've listened to today for the Forward Work Programme. Obviously the next meetings are in January and your meetings after that, so we would look to ask for reports in January. So if there's anything at this stage, we can make a note of that for perhaps discussion at the next meeting. Otherwise, Chair, I'll hand back to you before looking at paragraph 9.1, the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Tracy. And if anybody wishes to raise anything at this point, please indicate on the messenger. My gut feeling on this is that the local government settlement is key to what we'll need to be looking at, actually. And once we get it, it might well then indicate some areas that we would need to look at. But does anyone have anything they wish to raise at this point? Or would you prefer to wait until the next meeting when the local government settlement will be known and the impact, more importantly, of that settlement will be shown?
We'll wait, ma'am.
Altaf, did you wish to speak?
No, I said we'll wait, as you
Right. Okay, no, that's fine. If you're all happy to wait for that settlement, because that's going to indicate exactly what difficulties we're going to encounter in the next financial year. Well, if that's the case, then I'll take you to item 9.1 to note and to agree. We will agree to wait and see what the settlement will actually produce for this directorate. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Oh.
Second.
Thank you. Right. I have no urgent items, so can I thank you all for your attendance here today?
Until we see the report.
Yeah. Sorry, Mike, did you want to make a statement at that point?
No, sorry about that. I interrupted you then. I apologise.
No, that's all right, Mike. I thought you meant, but I thank you all. I think we're all in agreement on the local government settlement. Until we know what it's going to be, we can't even begin to assess the impact. So I'd like to thank you all for attending here today. And if I don't speak with you again, have a lovely Christmas and stay safe, please. Thank you.
You too, ma'am.